So welcome to the online drug and alcohol education session brought to you tonight by Sutherland Ben, Engadine District Youth Services, Project Youth and Ready Project, which is run out of St George Youth Services. So you will be able to access this presentation later via email. So if you are worried that you might miss anything, don't forget you will have a chance to go back and have a look at it. And you'll also get time for questions at the end. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them, and if we can, we'll get to them and answer them for you. Okay, so my name is Ngaio. I oversee the Ready Project at St George Youth Services. I'm a drug and alcohol worker, and I work with young people and their families. So I'm here with Chloe tonight, and we're going to talk about alcohol and other drugs and their young people and their relationship with alcohol and other drugs. And I'm going to cover mainly the drug content. I can't make this move. Oh, technical difficulty. Oh, sorry, there you go. Okay. Beautiful. Sorry. Okay, that was my fault. We're at the end. All right, so now we're at the beginning. So I'll try and make sure that the information I give you tonight can be framed not only for you to know, but information that you can then pass on to your young person. So basically our aim tonight is to upskill parents in relation to drugs and the young people in their lives. Okay. So first I want to look at why young people use drugs, and I think that this is a good point of focus because it's important for parents to remember that there's a range of reasons why young people tend to use drugs, and when I say drugs I include alcohol in that, of course, and not all of those reasons are negative. They're not, you know, it's a young person might be engaged in drug use and not necessarily be doing it because they're desperately unhappy or lonely, although they can be reasons. So of course we're looking at things like experimentation, which is a massive part of the adolescent process, socializing with friends, much in the same way adults do. You know, young people will use things like alcohol and other drugs as a social lubricant to address those anxieties that they may feel when they're engaging in socializing with their friends. To celebrate, so they will use it as a marker for a celebration, to relax and to relieve boredom, to have fun and feel good, also for confidence building, and of course rebelling, which is a massive part of adolescence, along with experimentation, and to escape. So that is one of those aspects around they might be escaping how they feel, they might be escaping the stress of school. There's a whole range of reasons, but I really think it's important for parents to remember that if they always come at the drug issue from the perspective that any young person doing it must be somehow deficient or immoral or just inherently bad, the argument's kind of lost before it begins. Okay, so who are young people listening to? So here's a list of, you know, the young people, as you know, young people have been spoken to and questioned around who it is that they access for advice. So at the top of the list is parents, carers and siblings, but of course, as I'm sure a lot of parents would have experienced, they're not actually literally at the top of their young person's list as in terms of who they access for information, particularly on things like alcohol and other drugs, sexual health, gender diversity issues, sexual diversity issues, and other issues that might be pertinent to a young person. Doctors and health professionals also tend to fall quite low on the list. Although they might be what an adult would deem a reliable source of information, what we found is that young people are either concerned about confidentiality issues, they might be embarrassed, they might be concerned that they'll be judged. Often they're dealing with doctors that are family doctors, so they might have been seeing this doctor since they were young, and the relationship is very involved with their parent, and they don't realize that their rights are that they can actually go and speak to their GP and not have that information be carried back to their parent. So that's something I always encourage parents to let their young people know as well, that if they can't speak to them, then if they'd like to go and speak to their GP, that they can do it in a way that's non-judgmental and they don't have to worry about confidentiality. Television and magazines are, of course, two sources of information for young people, and the internet is a massive source as well. Young people tend to, you know, they're all familiar with the concept of Google as a verb. and they will jump on the internet and look up, you know, any issue that's pertinent to their life. They'll be searching on the internet for information. So that's great and problematic all at the same time. There's such an array of information available to young people on the internet, and not all of it is well sourced, not all of it is credible, and not all of it is accurate. So it's important to remind your young person, if they're going to be accessing information that's relevant to their health via the internet, then they need to make sure that they're looking on a credible site. So they want it to be government run, you know, run by the health department, something like that. But we'll look at some of those a bit later on. And of course, Friends is a major source of information for young people. That peer-to-peer information sharing is huge for young people, but of course has its problems as well, because not all young people are skilled or educated or up to date with information on drugs and alcohol and sexual health, and there can be a tendency for street myths to start, you know, being widely disseminated, and it's amazing how inaccurate a lot of the information that young people carry is. So I've just put down the bottom there the question of what are some of the barriers for young people when it comes to talking to parents, and what are some of the barriers for parents. So Chloe's going to touch on those communication skills later. So maybe this is just a good point to start thinking about what do you see as the barriers for your young person when it comes to accessing you for information, and what are the difficulties that you find when it comes to talking to your young person about these sorts of issues. Okay, so now we're going to talk about drugs. So the three categories of drugs are stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogens. So stimulants are all the drugs that speed everything up. So they increase the activity of the central nervous system, making the person more alert and aroused. So these are the drugs that keep you awake. These are the drugs that make everything move faster. These are the drugs that increase heart rate and blood pressure. Depressants do the reverse, so they slow down the activity of the central nervous system, which reduces alertness, and it also slows down functions such as breathing and heart rate. So these are the drugs that can cause death through respiratory failure, things like overdose through people stopping breathing, those sorts of things if depressants are taken in excessive amounts. Hallucinogens are the drugs that make a person see, hear, smell, or feel things that are not there. So these are all the drugs where people imagine things that aren't real. So we'll go into what drugs fit where. Okay, so stimulants. So nicotine, caffeine, of course, is the most widely known and used stimulant. A lot of people find it weird to hear that nicotine is a stimulant, because they'll talk about feeling agitated and then they have a cigarette and they feel calm. Nicotine is still a stimulant. It's just that action that's happening for them then is actually the addiction being sated. So that's a whole nother aspect of drug use. Cocaine, ecstasy, speed, and methamphetamines. So methamphetamines are things like crystal meth, ice. Methamphetamine is the kind of chemical name for it, but there's a whole range of street names that they're known by. So these are all drugs that keep people awake for extended periods of time. And of course, stimulants can result in death as a result of raising the blood pressure and speeding up the heart rate. Depressants are things like alcohol, cannabis, sleeping pills, tranquilizers, and of course opiates. So these are all the things that are quite well known for overdose factors and tend to cause a lot of deaths as a result of the respiratory issue. The hallucinogens are LSDs and acid magic mushrooms. So cannabis is actually a mix of depressant and hallucinogen. Cannabis has two chemicals in it. One is THC and one is cannabinoids. So the THC creates the hallucinogenic effect. So that's the part of cannabis where people might hear things, see things, feel things, experience things that aren't real. And the cannabinoids is the depressant. So that's the bit that actually calms them down. So there's a lot of talk, there has been a lot of talk lately about cannabis being different to how it used to be. They'll talk about how cannabis was a lot lighter in the 70s, or it was a lot better in the 70s because it didn't make people spin out or it didn't make people trip out. And now it's much more potent, and and it's basically different. There is some truth in that. Mainly it has to do with the levels of THC to cannabinoids. So cannabis that was grown what's known as bushbud, so it was grown kind of organically or grown out in the bush, tended to have a much higher rate of cannabinoids in it, which created that sort of the depressant effect, so it tended to calm people down, it tended to make them feel more relaxed. Nowadays, the new hybrids of cannabis, most of them are grown hydroponically. They've upped the THC component and lowered the cannabinoids, so the people that smoke them feel a lot more stoned and they feel a lot more affected, and they get a lot more anxiety and they get a lot more of that kind of bad trip feeling. So that's really the major difference when they talk about cannabis being different to how it used to be. Ecstasy is a mix of stimulant and hallucinogen. So cannabis is a mix of depressant and hallucinogen. Ecstasy, which is basically a chemical compound similar to methamphetamine, which is the stimulant aspect, also has hallucinogenic properties in it. Okay. So now we're looking at means of taking drugs. I'm mainly focusing on things like cannabis smoking here. I'm sure most people would be fairly familiar with a syringe. I think that if you find a syringe in your young person's bedroom, you're going to know that, you know, stuff is happening. It's more about familiarising parents with some of the aspects of drug use that might slip under the radar. And might be, sometimes parents can get confused about, you know, the argument that their young person is posing and whether that young person is correct or not. So we'll start with bongs. So as you'll see, the middle picture there, that's a glass bong, and down the bottom right hand, that's a homemade bong. So if your young person says bongs aren't illegal, they're actually technically correct. That is true. The parts of a bong, or a bong in general, is not illegal. They're sold in shops. So you'll see that that glass bong there, that's been made in a factory somewhere and sold in a shop. That hasn't been rigged together by a young person. You'll see the stem that goes into it, the metal stem and the cone on the end, which is where the cannabis sits. All of those things are available for purchase in certain stores, and they're not illegal to have, they're not illegal to own, they're not illegal to carry, but they are illegal to use. So if you find a bong or parts of a bong in your young person's bedroom and they tell you it's not illegal to have it, they're correct, unless of course it's covered in cannabis resin, which means that they've been smoking cannabis, which is illegal. So you'll see down the bottom right, as I said, that's a homemade bong. So young people are able to make a bong out of essentially any kind of plastic vessel, or any vessel really, as long as they can puncture 2 holes in it. And then that stem that you see going into it, that's often they're using garden hose, and they can make cones out of things like foil or tin. One of the things that we talk, when I work with young people that use drugs around harm minimization, we talk about not using plastic bongs. So if you want to have a conversation with your young person about other associated risks or harms, one of the major problems with smoking a plastic bong is that the heat of the cannabis is very high, and when they inhale it into their lungs, they're actually burning that plastic, and they're inhaling parts of plastic particles are going into their lungs, and they fill the bong with water, so the smoke passes through the water into their lungs to cool down, and as a result of that, it's no filtration system. They're actually breathing in not just wet particles, but also the plastic particles, and it creates this kind of damp moistness in their lungs. And people that smoke cannabis over an extended period of time will actually develop this heavy, wet cough that they call a bong cough. So yeah, and you can hear it. It's as a result of using bongs. So yeah, that's a good point to raise with young people if they're trying to tell you that using bongs is safe. In the top left-hand corner there, you'll see pipes. So those are for smoking cannabis as well. Those can be sold in stores, and it's essentially like a bong setup, but without the vessel to hold the water. And then on the top right, those glass pipes, they're actually for smoking methamphetamine. So the drugs go into the bowl at the end, and then they hold the flame on the outside. Now they're kind of purpose-built. If you find one of those, there isn't a reasonable argument for having those because they don't serve any other purpose other than smoking drugs. Another way that young people will smoke drugs like ice is they'll get a strip of foil and they'll lay the ice on one side and they'll hold the foil and wave a lighter across the bottom, and they inhale the smoke through a glass pipe. So if you're finding bits of foil that look like they've got chemical residue on one side and burn marks on the other, then it's important to sit your young person down and have a conversation then. Okay, so street names with drugs. So obviously there's lots of street names when it comes to drugs, and there's always new ones coming through, and every subculture, every subgroup will have their own. But this might be something for you to come back and have a look at another time, just to have a read through, just to familiarize yourself with some of the terminology that a young person might be using, because it can keep you tuned in if you're hearing you know, your young person having a conversation on the phone or outside with a friend or something like that, and they're using words that are unfamiliar. It might be worthwhile checking out what the language is that they're using. Okay, so just a quick overview of who's using what. So this is for this was a study that was done amongst all Australian secondary school students in 2008. So as to be expected, alcohol and tobacco come in the top two. These numbers here are representative of young people or secondary students who had ever used that drug. So there is actually no discerning in these figures here around problematic use, heavy use, daily use, weekly use. You can actually access these numbers online, and they go into further detail. So they break it down into young people who are drinking in a high-risk way, young people who are drinking once a month. But these numbers are just those that had tried it at all ever. So obviously alcohol and tobacco are first. 8 out of 10 young people had drunk alcohol, and 50% of young people had tried tobacco. You'll notice that inhalants are actually third on the list above cannabis, even though cannabis has a much higher profile in terms of drug use with young people. I always find this interesting, but of course it's mainly to do with the fact that inhalants can be accessed by young people as a result of them not being illegal. So when we're talking about inhalants, we're talking about things like paint, you know, hairspray, bulbs that go into whipped cream, marker pens, glue, two-stroke, anything that they might find, any kind of chemicals that they find that if they inhale them, you know, they might spray them into a bag and inhale them, or just inhale them straight off the thing, and gives them an effect. So that tends to be why inhalants sit up so high, but the effect tends to be less desirable than other drugs. So most young people don't tend to continue with using inhalants. And then, of course, cannabis is the most widely used drugs. And then tranquilizers being things like Xanax, Normosins, Mogadons. They might be able to access tranquilizers through their parents' medicine cabinet. It's not unusual for parents to have those kinds of prescriptions. And then once young people get their hands on them, they tend to share them around. So this might be interesting for you to come back and have a look at as well, because it also shows that the more well-known illicit drugs are actually not in high use. 1 in 50 young people had tried cocaine, 1 in 50 had tried opiates. Yeah, so if there's any questions, please let me know. Okay, so we're just going to have a quick look at polydrug use. So that's basically mixing any drugs, more than one drug. So the first one, the most common, is cannabis and alcohol. The biggest issue with mixing cannabis and alcohol is that if someone has been drinking and then they start smoking cannabis, there's a tendency to feel really sick. There's a tendency to vomit and to potentially pass out. So I always talk to young people about the high risk that this might put themselves in. So if they're at a party and they're quite drunk and someone offers them cannabis and they smoke it, particularly if they're not very used to smoking cannabis or they're not very used to drinking, you know, a passed out young person in a room full of strangers is very vulnerable. So these are the sorts of messages that I encourage adults to, you know, talk to their young people about in regards to, you know, where a young person might be putting themselves in the highest risk. The next one is energy drinks and alcohol. So this is a really big issue at the moment. Energy drinks have kind of exploded in the last 5 years. Young people are loving them. You know, I'll talk to young people and they'll say, you know, it's awesome drinking vodka Red Bulls because they can drink much more than they used to, and they don't get as drunk, and they don't fall over and pass out, and the night doesn't end as quickly. One of the things I always remind young people when it comes to energy drinks and alcohol is that you cannot trick your body. You cannot get beyond your own physicality. So if you are pouring alcohol into your body, your body is getting drunk irrespective of how you feel. So the stimulant is keeping them stimulated, it's keeping their brain running fast, but the truth is their body's getting as drunk as they would do if there was no stimulant. So the risk there is, of course, that once that stimulant starts to wear off, that young person is going to be very drunk, and as a result of that, they're going to be very at risk. One of the best analogies I've ever heard when it comes to energy drinks and alcohol, or mixing the two together, is that it's like putting your foot on the brake and the accelerator of a car at the same time. And anyone that knows engines would know what that does to an engine. And so this is the sort of stuff that they're doing to their body. So it's really high risk. There's lots of reports now that suggest that it creates an increase of aggressive or violent behaviour and also risk-taking behaviours. So again, if you're happy to approach these sorts of conversations from a harm minimisation perspective with your young person, then if you're going to say, okay, you're going to drink, definitely leave out the energy drinks. Drink spiking. So drink spiking is an issue, as it always has been. But one of the things that a lot of young people don't realise, you know, when you talk to them about drink spiking, they imagine some creepy guy in a trench coat dropping something into their drink that they don't realise, and then they pass out and get carried off in a van. The truth is that the most common drug used in drink spiking is actually alcohol. One, because it's not illegal, and two, because it's really easy to mask the taste of alcohol in an alcoholic drink. So what happens is that a young person thinks that they're drinking a single shot, and really they're drinking a triple or quadruple shot. And all the effects of excessive alcohol use are the same. So a tendency to pass out, to black out and not remember, to lose control of their body, and of course it makes them incredibly vulnerable. And a lot of the time drink spiking is happening amongst people that know each other. So it's something that's, you know, young people are spiking each other's drinks because they think it's going to be funny, or they think it's going to be a great time for the person whose drink they're spiking. So it's not just about educating young people about looking after their drinks, but also about the risks of engaging in this behaviour and being someone that might pour half a glass of vodka in someone's Coke. And one of the other things I always emphasise with young people is that if anyone ever tells you that they believe that their drink was spiked, to believe them, because it's a scary and disorienting experience for people, and it's important for them to feel believed. Okay, so we're just going to quickly look at signs of overdose. So if ever you find your young person in this state, or if you're able to extend to your young person this information if they're around with friends and this sort of thing happens, anytime someone can't be woken, if their breathing starts to slow down and get abnormal, if they're snoring or noisy breathing, so that can be a sign of opiate or tranquilizer overdose, is that they start to get this kind of rattle in their mouth and nose when they're snoring, an inability to stand up or sit up, so a loss of body control, excessive vomiting, extreme anxiety or distress, chest pains, stomach pains, confused and disoriented, and of course if they become unconscious or are not breathing. So the way I explain it to young people is that anytime they're around someone that's having a really awful time, to call an ambulance. Chloe's going to go a bit into calling an ambulance as well, so I'll skip over this, and you can always access this in the link that you get. So one of the things we always stress with young people is to remember that the police are not necessarily called to an ambulance, and when an ambulance attends a young person if illicit drug taking has been involved, unless the ambo is threatened, unless someone dies, or unless they're asked to. We also teach young people how to put their friends in the recovery position. So if someone drinks so much that they pass out, how to teach a young person to know how to get their friend onto their side so that they're safely propped up, so that if they vomit, it's going to drain out of their mouth safely and they're not at risk of choking on their own vomit or inhaling their own vomit. Then that's great. It's a good way for them to look after a mate that's drunk, particularly if they're waiting for an ambulance to come. So these are some tips for safe partying. So if you know that your young person's going to be engaging in drinking, or if your young person is at an age where it's okay for them to be drinking, say they've just turned 18, then these are some tips that we talk to young people about so that they can make sure they don't put themselves in excessive risk. So always eat before, we always encourage young people to eat before they go out. Eating is a really integral part of the process. it stops the alcohol absorbing too quickly, and it means that they're able to monitor how drunk they're getting, how quickly. We also suggest that they make every second drink a juice or water or soft drink or a non-alcoholic drink of any sort. And then we talk about things like not letting people to convince you to drink or take anything that you don't want to, or drink more than you don't want to always stay with people that you trust, to try not to kind of lose sight of your friends, to try not to go off with strangers. And also look after someone if they become unwell. So if someone passes out or they start vomiting or they get scared, just stay with them. You know, it's rather than kind of, you know, putting a passed out friend in a back room and continuing on, to make sure that someone stays with them, and to always get help if it's needed, and to plan ahead. And one of the things I always say is that if you don't know what it is, don't drink it or take it. Okay, so the throwing off game is a game that I use with young people, and it's about them formulating excuses that they can use in a situation where they might feel pressured to drink excessively or to take drugs that they don't want to take. So this is basically an opportunity that you could have to talk to your young person about what would be a great excuse that they could use if ever they find themselves in that situation. We always find things like saying, I'm allergic to alcohol or I'm allergic to drugs is great. We encouraged one young person to say that their parents had a drug testing kit, and that the minute they walked in the door, they were submitted to instant drug testing, and if they'd taken anything, then their parents would know. We've had young people who talk about, you know, I have a history of alcoholism in my family. You know, they might want to make it, you know, a couple of generations back, and they think that they're susceptible, or they might use mental health susceptibility as well. Sometimes a person might want to reframe it in terms of wanting to appear tough, but at the same time not engage in drinking or taking drugs. So they might say something like, yeah, I come from a history of hardcore alcoholics or drug addicts, and I know that I could totally become that if I started, so I best not start. You know, things like that, giving them some great package that they can use to kind of get them through those high pressure situations. Okay, so signs of dependence. So these are things that you might want to look for. Again, Chloe's going to go into this as well, so I'll just touch on it briefly. And these are the sorts of things that if you find yourself in a situation talking to your young person about their drug use, these are the things that you might want to see if they're able to articulate if any of these things are happening in their life. So if they're growing tolerance, so if they're having to engage in more and more and more to get the same effect, if they feel anxiety or discomfort between using, then that means that they're in a state of withdrawal, wanting to stop but continuing to use anyway, and sacrificing greater amounts of time, energy, money on drugs or drug-related activities, and also starting to drift away from friends and families, and also activities that they had once enjoyed. And so then these are some websites that young people can access or parents can access around getting help. So youth services are a great port of call if you need more information. There's Project Youth in Shire-wide and St George Youth Services in the St George area. And then you can go online to places like ADDN, which is the drug services, the alcohol and other drug services and treatment centres, Drug Info, the Australian Drug Foundation, and a whole range of others. One of the ones on there, and you'll be able to access this later when you get the link, is Reach Out. So it's www.reachout.com. That's a great website for young people to go on. It's peer-to-peer support, and they're able to get support from other young people that might have experienced the same situations that they're going through. And that's everything. Thank you so much for listening. I'll put you on to Chloe.
Hi, good evening. My name's Chloe. I work at Project Youth. I'm the Health and Outreach Coordinator. Project Youth was formerly known as Shire-wide Youth Services. We've just recently had a name change. I'm here to mainly talk about drug and alcohol and how to engage our young person. But first of all, I'll just give you a quick overview as to what our service does. We're the largest provider of youth services in the Sutherland Shire. From Cronulla to Menai, we deliver a wide range of services and programs to young people across the Shire. These services include things such as outreach, which is street work, going out and talking to young people who might not necessarily engage in coming into youth centres. So we go out and talk to young people who may be at risk on the street if they're drinking, or they might be homeless, whatever those issues are. We can actually access young people out on the streets and hopefully get them involved in some of the programs that we run. We offer counselling and support. We also have a GP clinic that's open on a Thursday evening with 2 youth-friendly GPs who also do general practitioner stuff, but also mental health care plans, which we have a lot of young people coming in, and whether it's just an anxiety issues or depression or other mental health such as bipolar, whatever those issues are, they can access the GP to get a mental health care plan done, and then a referral onto another youth-friendly psychologist or counsellor. We have our own accommodation properties, so if young people are, having problems at home for whatever reason, we have a number of properties that are medium to long term, and also semi-independent and independent living. So we've also got information. We do a lot of information referral programs. We do court support. We have mentoring services. We do youth connections, which is working in schools for those who are at risk of dropping out of school. And we also do things such as what we're doing tonight, which is coordinating programs and activities, whether it's going out to the community or going into schools or events. And we also deliver programs in the St George and Illawarra regions. So our mission quickly is to provide opportunities for young people to determine their own future. And our principal objective is to provide a range of direct support services to address the needs of young people who are either homeless, destitute, disadvantaged, disenfranchised or poverty stricken. Okay, so I'm not going to go on too much a little bit as how drug and alcohol affects young people, because Ngai's done a great job of that. But just so you have a little bit more information about the brain. It's not fully developed until a young person's 24. So all the neurotransmitters that are kind of programming our brain are not going to actually be complete until we're 24. So if drug and alcohol are kind of thrown into the mix, then it's going to stop our brain from completely, reaching its full potential. It'll stop us from, basically being able to learn things, which would become a lot easier had drugs and alcohol not been thrown into the mix. It makes us, it's harder to remember and learn things. And all this stuff can obviously affect their future. So if they're starting at a young age, while they're in school, then it's going to, affect their schoolwork, and then, that can lead on to future problems, with getting jobs and et cetera, et cetera. Now, young people also are risk takers because their brain's not fully developed. The gene that kind of kicks in around when you're 24 about, assessing risk isn't actually there yet. So if young people are already taking risks, you throw drugs and alcohol into the mix, the risks are higher, obviously. So they, are more at risk of doing things, like drink and drug-induced driving, dangerous activities such as unsafe sex behaviour, mixing drugs, violent tendencies, alcohol poisoning and overdose, a lot of those things that Ngaio has already covered. So just be aware that, young people are risk takers already. It's not necessarily their fault because that risk gene hasn't kind of kicked in yet. Throwing drugs and alcohol into the mix obviously increases the risks that they take. So it's just important to be aware of that. So how would you know if your teenager is using drugs? There are some signs I'm going to go through, but if your young person, if your child is experiencing some of these, don't freak out straight away, because it just could be a sign of, adolescence and, growing up and normal behaviour. But if it's a lot of these things, then it might be, time to kind of maybe have a think about, okay, look, we might need to talk about this. This is becoming a bit of an issue. So some of these things could be things like mood swings, explosive outbursts. I'm sure if you're thinking at home, my teenager does this anyway. But if this becomes more apparent than usual, something to be aware of. Staying out late or not coming home, having frequent absences from school or work, or if their schoolwork has really, kind of declined quite quickly, if they were a straight A student and all of a sudden they're bringing home, D's or whatever, that could be a sign of, drug or alcohol use. If they have an unexplained unexplained need for money, or if money is disappearing from your wallet. You thought you had, you know, 20 bucks and it seems to be missing, or valuables are going, you know, missing from the home. That's usually a really good sign to be aware of, because obviously, you know, they need money to try and buy drugs or alcohol. So that's something to really, yeah, that's usually not a sign other than, you know, they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Sudden or noticeable change in friends. That can also happen just, you know, as a natural part of growing up, that being aware of who those friends might be, you know, this new group of friends that they're all of a sudden hanging around with, you know, you don't seem to know much about them, you know. I'm going to talk a little bit later about, you know, getting to know your child's friends is really important. If they seem regularly tired, or their sleeping pattern seems to be changing a lot, that's something to maybe be aware of. If they're staying out late all night, over the, you know, every weekend they're going out all night, coming back in the early hours of the morning, that's also, you know, maybe a sign that they're using something to keep them awake all night. If they have changes in eating patterns, if their memory or their concentration seems a little bit impaired, if their eyes are bloodshot or glassy, that could be a sign also. And also if they're a bit lethargic and they've lost motivation in some of this, you know, the stuff that they used to be doing, whether it's sports or hanging out with their friends or going to the movies, whatever it is, and they just tend to have no motivation, that could be a sign as well. Okay, so your influence. Although Ngaio kind of said yes, friends and the internet are probably where they get most of their information, it's really important that children can feel that they can talk to you about their problems. So if the home environment is a good one, and, you know, they feel that you respect their feelings, the chances of them drinking or abusing drugs is reduced. So the more often you sit down and have family dinners each week, the less likely your children will become involved in substance abuse as teens. And this is research that's happened and proven that, you know, these families where people do sit down and engage with their children, they've got less likely chances of their children, you know, abusing drugs. But it's not just sitting down at the dinner table and just eating the meal, it's actually engaging and talking to your children at those meal times, you know, asking about their day, about their friends, what they got up to at school, who they're hanging out, you know, what their hobbies are, what they're into, who's their favourite, you know, I don't know, band member or anything like that. You know, just show that you are actually interested in what they're doing. Also, setting early curfews. I know a lot of young people, you know, feel that they don't want to have an early curfew, but young people need boundaries. And if young people have boundaries and their parents are actually giving them, they actually respect their parents more. If you don't give your child any curfews or boundaries, then they're going to kind of go off the rails because they feel like you don't care. It's important to know where they are at all times. If you're not home on a weeknight or a weekend or whatever, make sure that you can get hold of your kids by the phone, you know, by their phone. So make sure they've got credit in their phone, you've got credit on your phone, that if you're in an area that, you know, has bad reception, kind of let them know that might be the case, and maybe have an emergency number if they can't get hold of you. So knowing who their friends are and who their friends' parents are is really important as well. If you don't know, you know, that your child's friends' parents, and they go around that parent's house and, you know, I'm just having a sleepover at so-and-so's house, you don't know that parent. They could be, you know, encouraging your child to be drinking or doing drugs. So it's really important to know your child's friends' parents. But it's also important to really trust your child as well, okay? If you're constantly ringing them up and, you know, hounding them on the telephone, saying, where are you, what are you doing? And they are actually doing the right thing, but you're constantly hounding them and telling them, you know, checking up on them, then the chances are that they're going to kind of rebel and just say, you know what, I'm trying to do the right thing. It's not working, so I might as well be, you know, act up. So try and, you know, learn to trust your child. It can be difficult. What you can do is talk to them, okay? That's the most important thing. If you don't talk to them, you're not going to know what's going on. They're not going to, you know, bother opening up to you or talking to you if there is a problem. So it's important for them to feel that they can come and talk to you. So talk to them. Be patient, okay? They can be frustrating, but, you know, if you've got something that you can do, like count to 10 or think, you know, take yourself to a happy place when they're really frustrating you, just try and stay calm. Do whatever it is you can do. Just be patient with them, because blowing up and having, you know, a full argument with them isn't going to get you or them anywhere. So it's really important as well to choose an appropriate time to talk. I always found that washing up, when I was working with young people, doing the washing up or driving in a car was a really good place to talk to people, young people especially, because one, they can't get away, and two, there's no kind of direct eye contact, which sometimes can make people open up a little bit better. And if they're not ready to talk, then, you know, let them know that that's okay and that you're there when they are ready to talk. There's no point in trying to pressure them when they're not ready. So try and be non-threatening as well. You know, listen and don't interrupt. It's really important that they feel that they're, you know, what they're saying is being heard, and that you are actually paying attention to what they're saying, and it is important to what, you know, what they are saying. So value what they have to say, and, you know, think, you know, respect does go both ways. So helping them think for themselves as well. So if they kind of feel that, you know, they're going out with their friends, kind of say to them, you know, well, what do you think are safe ways to keep, you know, ways to keep yourself safe if you are going out tonight? You know, what have you got on you to, you know, if you do get yourself into a situation, what can you do? So help them think for themselves, you know, just by talking to them before they're going out for the night. Work with them, not against them. Support and encourage them, especially positive behaviour. If they are doing the right thing, really reinforce that and say, you know, that you are proud of them, so that they know that, you know, that you know, what they're doing is okay, and that it's worth carrying on doing that. They've got your respect. And know the law. I'm going to talk a little bit about the law later on. So it's really important to know that, because that can get you into a lot of trouble if you don't know the law. What else can you do? So as I said before, just make the time, talk and listen. There's no point in sort of opening up a conversation when you've only got 5 minutes before you've got to go to work, and they want to, you know, open up and start talking to you. So make sure, if you want to talk to them, that you've got the, you know, there is enough time for them to sit down and talk, you know, and open up to you. Don't do it when you're kind of rushing out the door. Set limits. So delay the age that they start drinking. Research has shown that if the young people's parents has, you know, say it's okay for them to drink at a younger age, then the chances of them engaging in, you know, regular drinking is increased. So yeah, really delay the age they start drinking, and also just for them, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, how their brain isn't fully developed, and the damage it, you know, drinking alcohol can do, and other drugs obviously. Explain that they don't need alcohol and drugs to have a good time. You know, that, you know, they're young, they should be able to have, you know, fun by themselves, and if they can't, then, you know, they just think about why is that, you know, there should be some issues around why they can't enjoy themselves without having drugs or alcohol. Never ever buy alcohol for them if they're underage. Reach an agreement and set boundaries. So if your young person is going out, it's important to have a boundary and say, okay, well, what's your, you know, maybe what's your curfew, for example. They're going to come at you at a really ridiculously late time, so you come at them at a really ridiculously early time, and then you can maybe kind of reach an agreement as for something in the middle. So that boundary is set, and then also have an agreement as what the consequence is for breaking that boundary, that, you know, that rule, so that they know that if they do break that rule, this is what's going to happen, and it's not going to turn into a, you know, full-blown argument if nothing's been agreed to beforehand. So, you know, I always think a great, you know, consequence for people breaking their, you know, boundaries is taking away their phones, or, you know, something that, you know, they can't interact with their friends with, so Facebook or whatever it is. Reducing their internet time, something like that. But as long as they know that that's what the consequence is going to be, then they've got a greater chance of, you know, accepting it. It's not going to turn into such a huge issue. Being a role model is really, really, really important. Okay, so if you're going around drinking and getting drunk in front of your child, then that's really, you know, setting them a bad example. They're obviously going to think, well, that's the normal thing to do. That's okay to do. So really, you know, don't get drunk in front of them. Don't drink heavily in front of them. Listen to their concerns. Tell them it's okay to say no, and, you know, not to give into pressure. As Ngaio said, the throwing off game's a really good thing, and that's a really good way of engaging your child as well. To, hey, come on, if you're going to go out and you feel pressured, what are some of the things that you can say? And it can become, you know, a game as to, you know, what excuses you can make up if they are put on the spot and they don't want to engage in those sort of activities. So remember as well that most teenagers will probably try alcohol or drugs at one time or another. Ask yourself, you know, did you or any of your friends when you were young? Chances are, you know, you probably did, or your friends did. And remember the stats that Ngaio gave earlier on as well, you know, alcohol and tobacco being the most common drug that, you know, young people are going to experiment with. Okay, a little bit about tips on communicating effectively. Your child needs to know that you're listening and being open and not closed-minded to what they're saying. So effectively communicating means not giving lectures or judging them. I don't know if any of you have heard of I statements, sort of you statements. These are examples that I can kind of sort of give, which basically explains that if you say things like, I'm really worried about your behaviour, rather than you should change your behaviour, people are actually going to start thinking a little bit about maybe your feelings, and they might, if they respect you and they're, you know, worried about your feelings as well, then they've got a higher chance of maybe doing something about that issue. So saying, I feel, you know, really worried when you don't call me if you're, you know, curfew's late, is better than saying your problem is you just got no respect, you don't care. Okay, you don't care about, you know, anybody else except for yourself. And that can kind of put up barriers with young people, and they're like, well, screw you, whatever. But if they think that, oh, hang on, I'm actually, what my behaviour is affecting, you know, my mum and dad, then, you know, they've got a higher chance of maybe changing that behaviour. So yeah, I statements are a really good way of openly communicating with your with your child. Some tips for you. Seeing as teenagers don't like rules, you have to persuade them that underage drinking is illegal and young persons can be fined up to $2,200. Tell them, you know, how to do things differently. Make sure you can easily be contacted and you're there to help, and feed them a good meal beforehand if you know they are drinking. Tips for them could be before, if they are going out, sort of say, you know, say to them, eat a big meal, plan everything, don't drive. While they are out, if they are, you know, drinking and you know that they're going to be drinking, kind of encourage, like, drink soft water, soft drinks, don't do shots, avoid mixing, be mindful of drink spiking, stay busy. That basically means, like, you know, maybe play pool or do dancing so that they're not constantly sitting there drinking. Staying busy can help reduce the amount of alcohol they might be drinking. Avoid rounds, because some people might be drinking faster than you, and you know, you don't have to feel that you've got to keep up with that. And keep eating as well, because that helps absorb the alcohol as well. Well, sort of stops the alcohol getting into the blood fast. Tips for after drinking: don't drive and don't let your drunk mates drive. Really important. Don't get into a car with anyone who you think might be, you know, drunk or drug induced. Make sure you've got enough money to get a taxi and credit for a phone call. Hang out with people who are going to look after you, and drink water, especially before you go to bed. So these are just some tips that if your child is, you know, 18 and over, then yeah, to help them kind of stay safe and feel a bit better. Okay, so as I said, I mentioned a little bit about the law. It is illegal to supply alcohol to anyone under 18 years old unless you're their parent or guardian, even if you're in your own home. So if your child's having a party, say it's their 18th party, and you've got 17-year-olds at that party, and you're supplying alcohol, you could face an $11,000 fine for each minor that you supply alcohol to, and a possible 12 months jail as well. So just be really aware that if you are found to be serving alcohol to anyone under 18, that is a hefty fine, or, you know, prison sentence as well. It's illegal to supply alcohol to your own child in a pub or a club or a public place. In your own home, it's okay, but in the public area, it is illegal to supply alcohol to your own child. Okay, I know Ngaio's kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's really important to get this message across. Seek medical advice if, you know, a person is unconscious. Pinching and poking and shouting won't wake them up. So this is really important to kind of get out this message to your child. If they feel that their friend is, you know, needing medical advice, then say to them, look, if they're these following things, it's really important to ring the ambulance. If their skin is cold, vomiting, but not waking up, and breathing very slowly, I think it's one breath every 10 seconds is really, really dangerous. So tell them to call the ambulance. Do not hesitate. It's really, really important to get the message out. And as Ngaio mentioned before, they worry because if they've been taking drugs, they think that they're going to call the police. The police do not get called unless a serious crime has been committed or the ambulance people feel that they're, you know, being threatened or in danger. So it's really, really important to get that message out. Now, a lot of young people might kind of say to you or ask you, oh, what if, you know, there's a big, you know, fee that you have to pay for an ambulance. And yes, that is true. We try not to really get that message out to young people because we don't want them worrying about that instead of, you know, ringing and calling the ambulance. It's much more important to have, you know, a friend that's alive rather than a hefty ambulance bill, you know. So if they do ask, be honest, but it's best to kind of maybe not let them know that information. We try and keep it quiet because we don't want them thinking, oh, I better not ring. Maybe it's the wrong, you know, it's the wrong thing to do. If they're worried about their friend, tell them to ring the ambulance. It's really important. Okay, a little bit about just getting some help. Ngaio kind of spoke a little bit about some of these services. I'll just leave these up, I think, because I think Ngaio and I can maybe answer some questions if we have any young. We've got a few questions here from some parents. So Ngaio and I are just going to talk together and go through some of these questions. Okay. Okay, so Claudia has asked, where can I get a drug testing kit and how do I use it? Do you know?
Yeah, so we were just answering Claudia's question. They can actually be ordered online. Yeah. Obviously, a drug testing kit is something that you probably want to think long and hard before you used one. But as Claudia was saying, she's got a situation where she feels that it's an appropriate response to her young person's behaviour. But one of the things I was saying to Claudia is that I would definitely be looking at having a response ready to go, because if you're engaged at that kind of in that conversation with the young person and they're showing signs of drug use that's resulting in using a drug testing kit, chances are the drug test is going to come up positive. So I'd be ready with a response for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, is that the only question that we've had?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so if anyone has any questions, our emails are available through Susie Field. I think there's someone typing at the moment. We'll see if we can get to that person in a moment. Otherwise, as we said, this information is available via email, the presentations that myself and Ngaio have done. So feel free to download them and go through them at your own pace. And as we said, our services are listed here and our contact numbers are as well. So if you have any more questions that you want to talk to Ngaio and I directly, feel free to call us anytime. Okay. Are there any more questions, Susie? No? Okay. Great. Bye.